Thank you for having me today. My name is Abena Asare, and I'm Associate Professor of Africana Studies and History here at Stony Brook. We meet today in the midst of an uprising against state-sanctioned violence targeting Black and African American people within the United States. This uprising is focused on transforming systems of racial violence and the individuals and institutions that defend, benefit from, and justify these systems. This is an uprising watered by the blood of Black folk, Black trans people, men, women, and children who have been lynched at the hands of the state. We sit in the shadow of families and community members who have had to organize and march and protest and give public statements even in the midst of their mourning. So we say their names: Rayshard Brooks, Maurice Gordon, Tony McDade, Elijah McCain, George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Philandro Castile, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, Mike Brown, Corinne Gaines. We say their names to make the state's violence visible. We also say their names because each of these losses ruptured a whole world. These were unique individual human beings who were relatives, mothers, friends, loved ones. Each is irreplaceable. These are not hashtags or Black bodies. Each of these precious ones was someone's whole world. Even as we say their names, we realize that we cannot finish. The list is just too long. Those cut down explicitly and covertly by our state keep coming, even as we weep and get our degrees, hold our Zoom meetings, and raise our children in a mixture of fear and hope. This problem of state lynching, which is a manifestation of our society's investment in morbid anti-Blackness, is not a matter of a few bad apples on the police force or a particularly sympathetic victim or a particularly brutal or egregious death. We are speaking today about the routine, deadly violence that has kept the wheels of this country's economic and political system churning as it has for the past 400 plus years. What does it mean to say enough? Enough already. We begin by taking stock of where we are. I need to acknowledge the decades of organizing and labor that have led to this current moment. We need to know that the Black Lives Matter movement, founded by 3 queer Black women in 2013, is a reclaiming and reignition of the Black freedom movement that extends back to the 1970s, to the Black Panther Party, to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the 1960s, to Ida B. Wells and her campaigns against lynching in the 1920s, to Frederick Douglass, who asked in the 1850s, "What to the Negro is the 4th of July?" A question that fundamentally is not about where Black people fit into the nation, but really about where the United States fits in to the annals of global inhumanity and freedom. So where are we? In the past 3 weeks, the Minneapolis City Council has voted unanimously to disband the city's police department and instead fund a new public safety system. The University of Minnesota has also severed ties with the local police department. Increasingly, folks around the nation are willing to articulate that pouring money into a police state does not make us safer, but it does make the country more unequal and definitely more deadly for Black and brown, poor and disabled folk. More people around the country are beginning to step towards a realistic vision of public safety. This past Saturday, 15,000 people marched through the streets of Brooklyn to protest the state's violence against Black trans women who face disproportionate levels of harm, both at the hands of police and in the streets. Racist statues are tumbling into the sea, pulled down by the hands of people who believe that we need other iconography, other symbols for our public spaces. At the same time, in these past weeks, we have seen protesters being assaulted by police throughout our urban areas. We are living through a time where police are pepper spraying crowds of protesters in the midst of a deadly virus that specifically attacks the human respiratory system. This should be considered a criminal act and should be stopped immediately. What I'm saying is that the fight is far from over. This is not a time for platitudes and complacency, not at all. This is a moment when each of us, individually and corporately, are being invited to take a look at our power. Where do we get it from? What is the nature of the power that we hold? And what do we want to do with it? Which brings me to Stony Brook and to our gathering today. We should be clear about a few things. Many of the institutions that have been quick or slow to release statements declaring their support for Black lives have yet to do anything at all to address the systemic racism that plagues that institution. And no, a panel or a town hall does not count as something. It may be convenient to wring our hands about George Floyd, but we must acknowledge that there's a man called Akbar Rogers, a Freeport, Long Island man not too far from here, who last December 2019 was beaten within an inch of his life by the police in Suffolk County. We have to acknowledge the presence of Jeffrey McClure, a 26-year-old man who was shot and killed by the police in Northport just a few days ago, when his father called 911 for psychiatric help for him. In Suffolk County, Black and brown people make up just 17% of our population, but account for 53% of felony arrest. In fact, the U.S. Justice Department is currently reviewing Suffolk's record of traffic stops and race because the data is just so egregious. I want to thank Nia Adams of the Long Island Progressive Council for some of these statistics. So what is Stony Brook University's relationship to the Suffolk County PD? Stony Brook is the largest employer, the economic hub of the region. What would it mean for our institution to lead in saying the region's budget and practices must reflect values that say Black Lives Matter? When a university releases these Black Lives Matter statements, we must ask how this commitment relates to the ongoing reopening plans that do not take into account how Black and other communities of color are being affected by the COVID-19 epidemic. My colleagues, Joseph Pierce and Odales Hernandez in the UUP, have written a powerful open letter insisting that our discussions of reopening and how that is being done is a racial justice issue, is an equity issue, and we must protect the most vulnerable members of our community as we make these plans. I would encourage you all to read that letter. As we wring our hands about George Floyd, we would do well to consider our own institution's links to prison labor. In 2019, Stony Brook University and Stony Brook Hospital spent nearly $40,000 on prison-made goods, thanks to historians Rob Chase and Jalile Suriel for these numbers. Our institution is tied up intimately in our national nightmare of racial violence. The question is, what are we willing to do about it? So the cry Black Lives Matter is not only about the police as an isolated institution. It is about looking at systemic racism and the way it is reproduced and protected and furthered by a number of institutions across our society. This country has historically, in law and practice, valued property and wealth and the need to acquire and defend these more highly than it has valued the lives and the bodies of many of us within its borders, specifically Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks. We are a country located on stolen land, built through stolen labor. So the cry Black Lives Matter in 2020 is another invitation to do this necessary work of reimagining and pursuing a future that is not forever trapped within our violent, racialized national history. Thank you.